Hi, everyone. Welcome to a deep dive on mental health.
Yes.
We're going to be unpacking this incredible interview with Dr. Paul Conti,
Right.
a psychiatrist who had some really fascinating things to say on the Huberman Lab podcast.
Yeah.
So get ready for some practical takeaways that you can actually use to understand your own mind better and maybe even unlock a happier, more fulfilling life.
Absolutely.
We're going to be talking about things like agency and gratitude.
Yes.
And even this thing called the generative drive.
Very cool stuff.
Intrigued.
Yeah, I think
I thought so.
Dr. Conti's approach, it really flips the script on how we typically view mental health.
Yeah.
He's not just focused on problems,
Right.
but on truly understanding what makes us thrive.
You mentioned that this interview really resonated with you. So what specifically caught your attention?
What stood out to me was how Dr. Conti emphasized agency and gratitude as hallmarks of a truly healthy self.
Right.
And he doesn't see these as just fleeting feelings or passive states.
Yeah.
He argues that they're like rewards you earn by actively cultivating a healthy mental structure and function.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine approaching life feeling empowered and in control,
Right.
while simultaneously appreciating the good things you have.
That's a powerful combination.
It is.
But how do we actually cultivate those qualities?
Yeah.
It's not like we can just flip a switch and become more empowered or grateful.
Right. It's not about instant change.
Yeah.
Dr. Conti makes a compelling comparison to physical health.
Oh, okay.
Think about it to be physically fit.
Mm-hmm.
You need to understand how your body works.
Yeah.
Your muscles, bones.
Right.
Your whole cardiovascular system.
Yeah.
He argues that mental health is similar.
Okay.
We need to understand our mental structure and function
Yeah.
to really thrive.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
It's giving me a new perspective on my own mental patterns.
Good.
But break it down for me. What does the structure of our mental selves actually look like?
Dr. Conti uses the image of an iceberg.
Okay.
The pith,
Right.
the part you see above water,
Mm-hmm.
represents your conscious mind.
Okay.
That's where your current thoughts, feelings,
Right.
and awareness reside.
Got it.
But beneath the surface
Yeah.
lies the vast hidden realm of the unconscious mind.
So a whole hidden universe within us.
It's
What exactly is going on down there?
It's where all those thoughts, feelings,
Mhm.
and memories we're not actively aware of live.
Okay.
And it's from this unconscious realm that our defense mechanisms emerge.
It's interesting.
They act as barriers,
Okay.
shielding your conscious mind from fear, confusion,
Mm.
or even despair.
So they're kind of
Think about things like rationalization avoidance or even, surprisingly, altruism.
wait, altruism can be a defense mechanism?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Imagine someone throwing themselves into helping others
Right.
as a way to avoid dealing with their own issues.
Wow.
It's not always a conscious choice,
Mm-hmm.
but it can be a way of protecting yourself.
Right.
Dr. Conti emphasizes that these defenses can be both helpful and harmful.
Okay.
It really depends on how they're being used.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much of what we do is driven by these unconscious forces.
For sure.
So we've got the conscious mind and the unconscious mind and these defense mechanisms.
Right.
What else makes up this mental structure?
All those elements combine to create what Dr. Conti calls your character structure.
Okay.
Think of it as the foundation of a house.
Got it.
It determines how you respond to stress,
Mm-hmm.
whether you tend to isolate or connect with others,
Right.
and how trusting you are in relationships.
Interesting.
It's the blueprint for how you interact with the world.
So it's not just about understanding these individual parts, but how they all work together
Right.
to shape our personalities and behaviors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, rising up from all of these layers is the self,
Sure.
the I, that experiences it all. It's the culmination of the unconscious. The conscious,
Mm-hmm.
the defenses, and the character structure.
Oh, wow. I'm starting to see myself in a whole new light.
It's a powerful framework.
So we've explored the structure, but what about the function side of things?
Right.
What are the active verbs of our mental selves?
Dr. Conti outlines a few key functions.
Okay.
The most crucial is self-awareness,
Right.
actively paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Got it.
It's about noticing how your defenses manifest in real-life situations.
So not just knowing about these defenses in theory,
Yeah.
but actually seeing them in action in ourselves.
Exactly.
How do we get better at that?
It takes practice and intention.
Yeah.
But think about it this way.
Okay.
Every time you react to a situation,
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself,
Okay.
what's motivating my response?
Right.
Is it coming from a place of fear, insecurity,
Mm-hmm.
or a genuine desire to connect?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like shining a light on those unconscious patterns that drive so much of our behavior.
Exactly.
What other mental verbs are important to understand?
Another key function is salience.
Okay.
Which is simply what captures your attention, both internally and externally.
Okay.
What thoughts keep popping up.
All right.
What news stories draw you in.
Yeah.
This can reveal a lot about your unconscious priorities.
So by paying attention to what grabs our attention throughout the day,
Right.
we can actually learn a lot about our unconscious minds.
Precisely.
That's really cool.
And all of this ties into our behavioral choices.
Okay.
These are the decisions we make about how to act.
Yeah.
Based on our values goals.
Right.
And yes, sometimes those unconscious defenses we talked about.
It sounds like we're constantly being pulled in different directions by all these internal forces.
It can feel that way sometimes.
How do we make sense of it all?
That's where understanding your mental structure and function comes in.
Okay.
It gives you a framework for understanding why you react the way you do.
Right.
What your triggers are.
Yeah.
And how to make more conscious choices that align with your values.
This is incredibly insightful.
I think so.
Feels like we're just starting to scratch the surface here.
Oh, for sure.
But before we move on, I have to ask, what about anxiety? It's such a common experience these days.
Yeah, it is.
How does that fit into all of this?
Dr. Conti acknowledges that anxiety is a natural part of being human.
Okay.
In fact, a healthy dose of it can be beneficial.
Okay.
Keeping us vigilant and safe.
Right.
But of course, too much anxiety can become paralyzing and counterproductive.
So how do we know if our anxiety is healthy or not?
That's a great question.
And how can we manage it if it's causing problems in our lives?
That's where understanding the structure and function of the self becomes so crucial.
Okay.
Think about your own anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be rooted in your biology, past experiences?
Right.
Or current thought patterns?
Yeah.
Dr. Conti suggests exploring all these possibilities to get to the root cause.
So it's not just about managing the symptoms,
Right.
but about understanding the underlying mechanisms driving that anxiety.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And that deeper understanding can lead to more effective and personalized ways to address it.
This is giving me a lot to think about in terms of my own anxiety.
I hear you.
It's empowering to realize that there are different angles to approach it from.
Absolutely.
But I want to touch on something that comes up a lot.
Yeah.
The power of beliefs and internal narratives.
True.
People often feel trapped in negative self-talk or limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
How can we break free from those patterns?
It's tough.
They can feel so deeply ingrained.
Dr. Conti has a great analogy for this.
Huh?
He compares changing deeply ingrained beliefs and narratives to trying to erase a word you've written 1,000 times.
Right.
The groove is deep.
I can definitely relate to that.
I think we all can.
So how do we even begin to shift those deeply etched patterns?
Yeah.
It can feel almost impossible sometimes.
It requires consistent effort and the right approach.
Yeah.
Dr. Conti suggests thinking of it like blazing a new trail.
Okay.
We need to consciously choose a new path, a new narrative,
Right.
and keep walking it.
Yeah.
Even when it feels unfamiliar and uncomfortable,
Right.
over time that new path becomes stronger and more accessible.
I love that analogy.
It's a good one.
So instead of focusing on erasing the negative,
Yeah.
we're building up the positive, creating new mental pathways.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it does take time and patience.
Right.
But Dr. Conti stresses that it is possible.
That's encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
It's so easy to feel stuck in those negative thought patterns.
It really is.
Before we dive into some of the more challenging aspects of mental health,
Yeah.
I want to talk about something we all want more of: confidence.
Okay.
What is it really?
Yeah.
And how does it relate to this framework of mental structure and function?
Dr. Conti defines confidence as the ability to trust yourself in a variety of situations without being crippled by fear or self-doubt.
Right.
It's that feeling of, I've got this.
Yeah.
Grounded in a realistic assessment of your abilities.
So it's not about being arrogant or thinking you're perfect.
Right.
It's about trusting yourself to navigate the challenges that come your way.
Exactly.
Got it.
And it's important to distinguish confidence from narcissism,
Okay.
which can sometimes mask underlying insecurity.
Right.
True confidence, according to Dr. Conti, comes from a place of self-awareness and humility.
So someone who is truly confident doesn't need to constantly prove themselves or put others down.
Right.
They have a quiet inner strength.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They're comfortable in their own skin
Right.
and capable of acknowledging their limitations
Yeah.
without feeling threatened.
This makes me think about humor
Okay.
and how it can be both a sign of confidence And sometimes a bit of a defense mechanism.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious to get your take on humor, especially sarcasm and cynicism.
Right.
Can they ever be healthy?
Humor can be a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It can diffuse tension,
Right.
help us connect with others, and even help us cope with difficult situations.
But there's a flip side.
Right, there can be.
When does humor become less about connection and more about self-protection?
Sarcasm and cynicism,
Right.
while sometimes funny, can also be ways of deflecting vulnerability or masking deeper issues.
Interesting.
Dr. Conti encourages us to examine our own use of humor.
Okay.
Is it serving us well?
Right.
Or is it hiding something we need to address?
That's an important question to ask ourselves.
Absolutely.
Sometimes our go-to jokes can reveal more than we realize.
If you can.
Okay. I'm ready to dive into the concept that really blew my mind in this interview.
Okay, let's do it.
The generative drive.
Right.
What is it, and why is it so important for living a fulfilling life?
The generative drive, as Dr. Conti explains it, is this innate human impulse to create, to grow,
Right.
and to make the world a better place.
Got it.
It's the force that drives us to learn to build, to connect,
Yeah.
and to contribute.
It sounds almost like an evolutionary imperative, something that goes beyond just our individual needs and desires.
It does.
Yeah.
Dr. Conti suggests it's even more powerful than the primal drives of aggression and pleasure.
Wow.
In a healthy individual, the generative drive takes the lead,
Okay.
guiding our actions and motivations.
So it's not just about seeking pleasure or avoiding pain,
Right.
but about creating something meaningful,
Yeah.
something that makes a positive impact.
Yes, and the beautiful thing is that generative acts
Yeah.
often lead to a virtuous cycle.
Okay.
They foster feelings of peace, contentment,
Mm-hmm.
and even delight,
Right.
which further fuel the generative drive.
Wow.
It's a self-reinforcing loop of goodness.
Okay, now I'm getting really excited.
I know, right?
But what if someone feels stuck?
Yeah.
Like their generative drive is dormant or blocked. Can they even access it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Dr. Conti emphasizes that we all have the capacity to unlock our generative drive.
Right.
It may require some work,
Yeah.
some exploration of those deeper structures and functions we talked about earlier,
Right.
but it's there waiting to be activated.
That's so inspiring to hear.
It is.
It gives me hope for those who might be feeling lost or unfulfilled.
Absolutely.
So what are some practical steps someone can take to awaken that generative drive
Yeah.
and start living a more fulfilling life?
It starts with self-reflection.
Okay.
Dr. Conti suggests asking yourself,
Okay.
what brings me joy?
Yeah.
What do I feel passionate about? What kind of positive impact do I want to make on the world?
Right.
And it doesn't have to be grandiose.
Yeah.
It can be as simple as learning a new skill,
Right.
volunteering in your community,
Okay.
or even just expressing more kindness in your daily interactions.
I love that.
It's powerful stuff.
It's about finding those sparks of inspiration and fanning them into flames.
Exactly.
But what if someone feels overwhelmed by the process
Yeah.
or doesn't know where to begin?
Dr. Conti encourages seeking support from loved ones, therapists, or other resources.
Right.
Sometimes having a guide can make all the difference.
This is such a rich conversation.
It is.
And I feel like we're just getting started.
We are.
Let's take a moment to let all of this sink in.
Yeah,
We'll be back in a flash to continue exploring Dr. Conti's insights.
that's good.
Welcome back. I feel like we could talk for hours about this idea of a generative drive. It's so fascinating. But before we get too carried away, there's another point Dr. Conti made that I found really thought-provoking.
Yeah,
He suggested that societies considered less advanced
right.
might actually have a stronger sense of peace and contentment.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. Conti suggests that societies with fewer distractions and less exposure to the constant barrage of information and negativity we face today might actually have an advantage when it comes to mental well-being.
It makes you wonder, what are some of those societal factors that might be hindering or supporting our generative drive? And how can we create a world that fosters greater mental well-being for everyone, regardless of their circumstances?
Those are important questions to consider.
Yeah.
If we zoom out and look at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
it seems like creating a culture that values genuine connection, meaningful work, and a sense of belonging could make a big difference.
Right.
It's about prioritizing mental health, just as much as we prioritize physical health.
That's so true. It's not just about individual effort. It's about creating systems and structures that support mental well-being on a societal level.
Absolutely. It requires a shift in our collective mindset,
Yeah.
moving away from this relentless pursuit of more,
Right.
and towards a deeper appreciation for what truly matters: connection, purpose, and well-being.
I couldn't agree more. But let's bring it back to the individual level for a moment.
Right.
Let's talk about anxiety. But Dr. Conti also addresses other challenges like narcissism addiction and those really dark moments when we feel completely demoralized.
Yeah.
How does his framework help us understand and navigate those more extreme states?
It all comes back to the structure and function of the self.
Okay.
Dr. Conti's approach isn't about labeling people or reducing them to a diagnosis.
Right.
It's about understanding how these challenges are rooted in the complex interplay of those deeper layers of the self we discussed earlier.
So, for example, how would you explain something like narcissism through this lens? It feels like it's becoming more prevalent these days.
Dr. Conti suggests that narcissism is often a defense mechanism,
Okay.
a way of protecting a fragile ego from feelings of inadequacy or vulnerability.
Interesting.
It's about creating a facade of superiority to mask deep-seated insecurity.
So it's not necessarily that narcissists are inherently bad people.
Right.
They're just using a maladaptive strategy to cope with their inner world.
It's more complex than simply labeling someone as good or bad. It's about understanding the underlying dynamics,
Right.
the fears and insecurities that are driving that behavior.
Mm.
And once we understand those roots, we can start to address them in a more compassionate and effective way.
That makes a lot of sense. What about addiction? How does that fit into this framework?
Dr. Conti views addiction as a hijacking of the brain's reward system,
Okay.
often driven by underlying pain trauma or a lack of healthy coping mechanisms.
So it's not just about willpower or moral failing, but about a complex interplay of biological, psychological, and social factors.
Exactly. And those factors can be understood and addressed through the lens of the structure and function of the self.
Right.
It's about helping individuals identify the underlying drivers of their addiction, develop healthier coping mechanisms, and ultimately reclaim their agency in their lives.
This approach really destigmatizes addiction and other mental health challenges. It's not about placing blame. It's about understanding and compassion.
And that understanding can lead to more effective treatment and ultimately greater hope for healing and recovery.
We've talked about anxiety, narcissism, and addiction, but what about those really dark moments, those times when you feel completely demoralized and hopeless? What wisdom does Dr. Conti offer for navigating those treacherous waters?
Even in those darkest moments, it's crucial to remember that you still have agency.
Okay.
You may feel lost and overwhelmed,
Right.
but you still have the power to choose how you respond, to seek support, to reach out for help.
But what if someone feels so trapped in their despair that they can't even see a way out? It's like being lost in a dense forest. Every direction looks the same.
That's where having a guide can be invaluable.
Right.
Whether it's a trusted friend, a therapist, or a spiritual advisor,
Yeah.
having someone who can help you find your bearings, offer a different perspective, and remind you of your own strength can make all the difference.
It's like having a lifeline in the storm. Someone to help you stay afloat when the waves are crashing down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage.
Yeah.
It takes strength to admit you need support. And reaching out for that support is often the first step toward healing.
That's so important to remember, especially for those who might be struggling in silence. Dr. Conti reminds us that we're not alone and that there's always hope, even when we can't see it ourselves.
He emphasizes that even small acts of self-care,
Okay.
like taking a walk in nature, listening to calming music, or reaching out to a loved one, can be incredibly powerful in those dark moments.
It's about finding those glimmers of light, those things that bring us even a moment of peace or solace, and holding on to them.
And gradually, those glimmers can grow into a stronger flame,
Yeah.
guiding us back to a place of hope and healing.
Dr. Conti has offered such a transformative framework for understanding mental health and well-being. He's given us so many valuable insights and practical tools for cultivating a healthier, more fulfilling life.
What's particularly impressive is his ability to bridge the gap between the complexities of the mind and the simplicity of actionable steps.
Yeah.
It's not about quick fixes or magic solutions.
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying structures and functions that shape our mental landscape, and then using that understanding to make conscious, deliberate choices that lead to greater well-being.
That's a perfect way to sum it up. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, self-awareness, and a deep commitment to our own mental health.
It's about remembering that we're not alone on this journey. There's support available, and we have the power to create positive change, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
Well said. I'm feeling so inspired by Dr. Conti's wisdom and his unwavering belief in the human capacity for growth and healing.
Before we wrap up, I want to share a thought that's been lingering in my mind since we started this deep dive.
I'm all ears.
Dr. Conti mentioned that sometimes our greatest strength can also become our biggest weaknesses.
Okay.
I've been thinking about that in relation to the generative drive.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, the generative drive can be such a powerful force for good.
Right.
But what happens when it becomes excessive or imbalanced? What if we become so fixated on creating, achieving, and making a difference that we neglect our own well-being or the well-being of those around us?
That's a great point. It's like anything in life, balance is key. Even something as positive as the generative drive can become problematic if it takes over.
Exactly. So the challenge becomes, how do we cultivate and harness the power of the generative drive while also maintaining a healthy sense of balanced self-awareness and boundaries?
That's a question worth pondering. It seems like it all comes back to that foundational principle of self-awareness.
I think you're right. It's about regularly checking in with yourself and asking,
Yeah.
am I using my generative drive in a way that's both productive and fulfilling?
Right.
Am I taking care of myself in the process?
Yeah.
Am I prioritizing connection and joy alongside achievement?
Those are powerful questions to keep in mind. It's a reminder that even the most positive qualities need to be tempered with wisdom and compassion.
And it's a reminder that the journey toward mental well-being is an ongoing process, a dance between effort and acceptance, striving and surrender.
Beautifully put. I think that's a perfect note to end on. This has been such an insightful exploration of Dr. Conti's ideas, and I feel like we've all gained a deeper understanding of ourselves and the path toward a more fulfilling life.
I agree. It's been a privilege to dive into this material with you and to uncover these valuable insights together.
Well, listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Dr. Conti's work. We've covered a lot of ground, but his insights are so rich that I'm sure you'll continue to unpack them long after this conversation ends.
Remember, the journey toward mental well-being is a personal one. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, but Dr. Conti has given us a powerful roadmap, a framework for understanding ourselves and navigating the complexities of the human experience.
So as you go about your day, remember to be kind to yourself, to cultivate your agency and gratitude, and to never stop exploring the incredible potential that lies within you. And remember that sense of generative drive that Dr. Conti talked about. It's within each of us waiting to be unleashed. What positive impact will you make on the world today?
And don't forget to appreciate the journey. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Wow, we've come to the end of our deep dive, but honestly,
I know, right?
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Dr. Conti's brilliant insights. There's so much here to unpack and apply to our own lives.
It really is amazing
Yeah.
how much we can learn from a single, insightful conversation.
Right.
Dr. Conti has given us so much to think about.
You know, one thing that really hit home for me was his emphasis on truly understanding ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I don't just mean our strengths, but also our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Those parts we might prefer to keep hidden.
That's where the real growth happens, isn't it? When we're willing to face those shadow sides of ourselves with honesty and compassion.
It's not always easy.
No, it's not.
But as Dr. Conti reminds us, it's often in those darker corners that we find our greatest strength, our resilience, our capacity for empathy, even our creativity can emerge from those places we might try to avoid.
It's about embracing the fullness of who you are,
Right.
the light and the shadow,
Yeah.
and integrating it all into a more whole and authentic self.
And that journey of self-discovery,
Right.
that's ultimately what leads to the agency and gratitude Dr. Conti talked about.
It is.
It's how we cultivate that deep sense of peace and contentment
Yeah.
that we all crave.
It's not a destination.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
A lifelong exploration of this ever-evolving landscape of the self.
So to wrap up our deep dive,
Okay.
what are some key takeaways
Yeah.
you hope our listener walks away with?
I'd say the biggest one is the power of understanding your own mental structure and function.
Right.
You're not just your conscious thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
There's this whole hidden world within you
Right.
that shapes how you interact with the world.
And once you start to understand those deeper layers, you can start to make more conscious choices that lead to greater well-being.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your mental health
Right.
and realizing that you have the power to create positive change.
It's been such a rich and insightful conversation.
It has.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to you, dear listener.
Yes.
I hope this deep dive has given you some valuable tools and a fresh perspective on your own mental health journey.
Absolutely.
Remember, you are not alone.
You're not.
There is support available.
Yeah.
And you have the strength within you to create a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Keep exploring, keep growing.
Yes.
And never stop being curious about the incredible potential that lies within you.
And until next time,
Yes.
don't forget to appreciate the journey.
See you on the next deep dive.